Alrighty, first and foremost, hello, my name is Wire Guitars. I've got, as you can see, a made bed. So that's necessary. I needed to let you know that because there's some guys that watch my channel that don't think that I ever make my bed. And as you can clearly see, my bed is made. But on to more pertinent issues. So I'm going to talk to you guys today about philosophy. As many of you know, I'm a huge advocate for philosophy as like a means of education, and we're going to talk about some things. All right, so let's talk about it. I'm going to jump straight into it. This is a picture, right, as you can clearly see, of a stick guy saying, I think my team will feed even though I have no reason to believe so. What actually ends up happening is the guy's team ends up feeding. We're going to look at 5 pictures today, and I've got a certain order that we're going to go into them, but this is like the first scenario that a lot of you, this is like the first scenario that I want to look at and kind of like divulge just a little bit about. I don't necessarily, the argument becomes very cohesive, not the argument, the discussion that we're going to have becomes very cohesive if I show you all 5 of the pictures together in tandem with each other. So we're going to like do that primarily, but just real briefly we'll talk about what this means. Basically, if you're trying to form an argument, you usually try to use sentential logic to like lay out what your argument is. And you may ask, what is sentential logic? What are these words that Wired's speaking? Sentential logic is like right here, propositional calculus. Basically, it's, if we click on this, I'm sure we'll get a better idea of what we're talking about here. Propositional logic. Here we go. It's basically making math out of philosophy. So like George Bush is a president, this is like maybe an article that was written at like 2003 or 2004. George Bush is a president of the United States. George Bush is a son of the president of the United States. Therefore, there is someone who is both a president of the United States and a son of the president of the United States. So that may seem very obvious. Sentential logic gets very difficult if you take a course on it, like right here. We start to see how we are, right? Yeah, we're talking about syntax and operators and stuff. It gets a little bit more complicated than just, you know, simply stating things that are true and then also trying to combine them with other things that are true. But just basically know that even though this may seem like a very, very basic and stupid picture to be showing you, it has a purpose, and we're going to tie things together. So I don't want to ramble too much. Anyways, here's a picture. A guy, this is you, the stick figure, and I've got 5 pictures to look at, and if you look closely, they all have a stick figure in them. Every single one of these stick figures is you, right? So replace the stick figure with basically this guy, like, is P, or, you know, U. Okay? All right. So you are making a claim in one of your games. This accounts for a few of you guys out there, and as we'll see, maybe it's more than you think, but one of you guys out there, or a few of you guys out there, or girls, whatever the fuck, are saying things like, I think my team will feed, even though I have no reason to believe so. And the truth ends up happening that your team ends up feeding, right? That probably happens in some of your games, maybe, or at least you think it happens in some of your games, okay? Look at another picture. In this one, you assert a claim such as, I think my team, I think my team will feed. I should say, I think my team will feed. I did such a rough draft of this, holy crap, I feel so bad, I'm so unprofessional. Don't take everything I say as gospel, but take some of the things that I say as gospel, okay? Or at least with a grain of salt. I think my team will feed because 10 games ago, my team fed, okay? So this is like, this isn't as weak of an argument as something like this, where you have no sort of evidence to base your assertion off of. You're just kind of like stating that you think your team's going to feed, like, and you even admit that you have no reason to believe so, right? Right here you said that. In this case, you said, I think my team will feed. I think my team will feed because 10 games ago your team fed. And then the truth ends up happening that your team actually ended up feeding, okay? So we're getting a little progressive here. In this one, you're making an assertion of knowledge. You're saying, I know my team will feed. I know they will. You don't just think that they will, or you don't just believe that they will. You're making a stronger claim than just thinking that something will happen. You're claiming a knowledge standpoint now in the discussion that we're having, saying something along the lines of, I know my team will feed. And then your reasoning for that source of knowledge is the same reasoning as it was, you know, and the last argument, which is because 10 games ago my team fed. And the truth, as we have thus far not tampered with, is in fact that your team ends up feeding. Okay? Following me? All right, we're gonna move on. This is the second to last picture we're going to look at. In this one, you have a pretty... we'll just go over it. I know my team will feed, so it's that same, like, stronger assertion of now you're making a knowledge statement, whereas two pictures ago, you weren't making a knowledge statement. Last picture, you were making a knowledge statement. This picture, you're also making a knowledge statement, right? Which is more affirmative. If you make something like a claim of knowledge, people expect more out of that claim if you just simply say, I believe. Okay, so in this game, or not in this game, sorry, we're going to make the comparison here to Dota in a second, but in this particular picture, you're making a claim of knowledge, I know my team will feed, and then you're making an assertion of stronger, how would we say, backing. It's got more of a leg to stand on, because the last 10 games in a row, your team ended up feeding, okay? This is probably the picture that resonates the most with a lot of you guys, but we'll go on. The truth ends up happening where your team ends up feeding. All right? So you have that affirmative claim that you didn't have in the first and second picture. You have that reasoning that you had in the second picture, but now it's a stronger reasoning as opposed to just saying, 10 games ago my team fed once, right? In the last 10 games, that's kind of like a weak claim of evidence. That's like saying in 10 games worth of evidence, only 10% of the time, one game, they fed. That's not really super strong evidence. But if the last 10 games in a row your team fed, maybe you'd be on tilt, maybe you'd have some sort of like a stronger reasoning to believe that your team's going to feed this time. So we're progressing the affirmation, or we're progressing what is it? We're progressing your sort of confidence in your argument as well as your reasoning behind your argument. And then the truth ends up your team actually ends up feeding too. So that's also that's not progressing. That's stayed constant this entire time. So now we're going to look at the last picture. It's very similar. I know my team will feed just like last time because the last 10 games in a row they fed. So that same sort of claim of knowledge followed up with very strong reasoning why. That's pretty good evidence. The last 10 games in a row they fed. That's pretty good evidence. They fed. But now look at the truth. Your team doesn't actually end up feeding in this situation. So what I want to, if you are like familiar at all with what I'm trying to get at here, I'm kind of pulling some, I'm in a theory of knowledge class, and I'm like a huge advocate of philosophy, so these are kind of like, these are thought experiments that I eat the shit out of, right? I'm always a fan of inductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning, a little bit different. I'm not too good at like sentential logic. I know the basics, but inductive reasoning I love, and I'll do this with somebody all day, dude, like 24/7. But what I'm trying to get at here and convey a message to you guys, even if you don't care whatsoever about philosophy, but how this ties back to you guys that are playing your Dota games, is that a lot of you are stuck in this mode of thinking of, I know my team's going to feed, because the last 10 games in a row were pretty bad, so I'm on tilt. They actually did feed those last 10 games in a row. And then, like, your team actually ends up feeding. I'm not even going to say a lot of you. I'd say, if we're going to break this up into a pie chart, right, I'd say you've got about 5% of the people in this category of, I just think my team's going to feed. You don't even, like, you're just kind of going into the game, you're like, I bet my team's going to feed, but I really have no reason to believe. So I bet about 10 to 15% of you guys are in this category, and then your team actually ends up feeding, and then you get a little bit more mad, and so maybe, like, there's a progression scale here, but maybe a good 10% again of you guys are in this category, where you say something like, I think my team's going to feed, and then you have some decent reasoning of like, well, the last 5 games I played, one of them or 2 of them, my team ended up feeding. It's not like solid concrete evidence that your team shows a consistent trend of feeding, right? That's why I'm saying only about 10% of you guys probably think this, is because this is like, this is kind of a rational stand. I know this is going to sound really weird, but I actually think that this is more of a rational standpoint to stand on than this standpoint is. If you're going to speak in the confines of the way that I've formulated this argument, which is Dota. Okay, originally Descartes and Norman Malcolm and Rene Descartes were talking about like the existence of knowledge and how you can make any sort of claim about doubt or anything like that, and that's a kind of a different discussion. But if we're talking about Dota here, I think that a lot of you guys don't really accept this as your actual source of reasoning for why you think that your team's going to feed when you enter your games. A lot of you guys think that you have like this freaking ironed out, stalwart, like fortuitous, if that's a word, like really, really strong, robust argument as to why your team's going to feed every game. You guys come in and you guys say something along the lines of, dude, Wired, man, the last 10 games, dude, or it's never the last 10 games, but like, man, my last 8 games in a row, like, I had an 8-game loss streak too, so I can speak from a little bit of relation here. Like, dude, my last 8 games, dude, fucking feeders every single time. Like, Jungle Necrophos Ancient, that hasn't worked since 6.84. What the fuck is this guy doing? You know, and you get really mad. And you say, like, you need to teach me something that I can do that will carry 4 absolute scrubs. And you come at me, like, saying things like, because I know that every single one of my games is just going to be my team feeding. Like, 2K MMR, bro. I know what it's like, dude. You don't know what it's like. Wired, you're in 4.5K, dude. You haven't been in the trenches, man. Teach me something that can carry 4 scrubs. Don't teach me how to play Earth Spirit. Don't teach me how to play Terrorblade. Don't teach me how to play Lycan, because I don't need to know how to play 3 heroes that are kind of good, you know, in certain circumstances where your team isn't absolute trash. I need to know how to fucking kill kids at this MMR, the 2K, the 3K, and stuff like that. And so you guys get on these like diatribes that are completely outlandish, because like you think that this is the case, right? You guys think that you know that your team is going to feed. You guys think that, you know, the last 10 games are evident of that, and you think that you have every reason to believe that your games from like henceforth, from moving on, are going to be this. But in actuality, it's often this, where your team doesn't actually end up feeding, or in actuality, you really don't have any reason to think that your team's going to feed, and you should be using words like, I think my team will feed. Or, you know, even this is like pretty ignorant situation to be in, where you guys are saying stuff like, I know my team's going to feed, and you have a very hazy reasoning as to why you think your team's going to feed, you know, because 10 games ago I had a team that fed, and then, oh man, fucking your team ends up feeding this game, or you think your team ends up feeding this game, etc. and so forth. And we could break down like the reasoning behind why either like your team actually fed, or even if your team actually fed, like did your team feed, or was it like did they, and I'm sorry, I'm kind of getting a little absent-minded here, like whether or not your team actually fed is also kind of up for debate. That's a topic for debate here too. That's what I'm trying to produce here as an argument. Is like, you may look at your team and say they fed, they did poorly, they underperformed, but in actuality, what really ended up happening was there was mistakes made by you that you can't recognize because you've got that confirmation bias, that preset notion that you are better than like 9 other people in the game, which is understandable. Obviously, if you're gonna come to me and say you think you belong in 3K, then it only makes sense. When you're 2K. If you're going to come to me and say you're 2.5K and you think you belong in 3K, then it only makes sense that you would think that the other 9 people in your game, enemies included, obviously, are stupid. It only makes sense. That's like congruent, right? That runs together fluidly, right? That is not in any way, shape, or form perpendicular as an argument. Okay, like it makes sense, and I understand that. But at the same time, it's important to note that even if you're better than all 9 people in the game, that doesn't mean that you can't make mistakes that could even cost you the game sometimes, right? So, yeah, I want to keep this brief, or as brief as I can. But that's where I'm standing here. So I'll go back to my regular hero guides tomorrow. I just wanted to put this video out now because I think some people need to hear this, and hopefully you guys enjoy these kinds of conversations as well, and you don't only want to see hero guides from me. So, anyways, thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you guys tomorrow.